Guys, so on today's episode of All About That Gear, we're going to be doing something a little bit different this time. We're going to start a series of top 5 lists. And to start, we're going to look at what we believe are the top 5 best amp makers today. As you'll see in a lot of my other videos, I usually lean more towards the vintage gear. And the reason why is I really think most of the time the vintage gear sounds just so much more organic, so much more lively, responsive, just raw and real. A lot of times the modern stuff, in my opinion, sounds a lot more filtered and restrained. It can kind of sound like you're hearing a recording of an amp, kind of like processed and fake. That being said, there's still lots of really terrific amps made today. So we're going to look at what we think are the best ones. And there's also some advantages to modern amps besides the obvious of reliability and dependability. One thing modern amps have over the vintage amps sometimes is they can sound more tight and precise. So yeah, before we get into the top 5, we're going to have 3 honorable mentions. They're all 3 very famous amp builders, and they are all more towards the metalheads. So the first brand we're going to mention is Bogner. And I know what you're thinking when I say Bogner. You might be thinking the Uberschall, the Ecstasy, the Shiva. But that's not why we're putting it as an honorable mention. If it were only for those amps, this would not be the top 10, probably not even the top 20, to be honest, for my opinion. It's really because, for me, the Helios and the Telos. These are both Marshall-style amps, and what really impresses me about these amps is how raw and organic they sound for a modern amp. As far as modern amps, there's really few, if any, amps that sound this organic and raw, like a real amp. They have that upper-mid Marshall growl. And yeah, very impressive amps. I would still, at the end of the day, rather get like a late 70s JMP 2203 for less money. But that's another story. That's not a modern amp. So the next honorable mention is going to be Diesel Amps, another super famous German boutique company. And it's because of amps they make like the Herbert and the VH4. The Herbert, of course, is known for that massive, massive bottom end like no other. But of course, to be honest, I think the Herbert's a little bit overrated. It's way too compressed for my liking. It's a bit scooped, sometimes a little bit too smooth. It doesn't have the complete growl. But the main problem is it's a little bit filtered and restrained. It can sound very processed. That's the main criticism people will tell you about this amp. But it's very versatile. It's a cool amp. And then, of course, is the VH4. And the VH4, of course, such a distinctive voicing with an amp that's known for that real dry, throaty, grainy texture, that growl. Most notably used, of course, by Adam Jones of Tool with his Blueface version and James Hetfield. I myself have a 97 Blueface amp, really rare amp. I might talk about it in future episodes. And the last honorable mention we have is Angle amps. And I know I can hear you behind the screen. A lot of you hardcore gearheads amps saying like, ew, why would you have Angle? Angle is so artificial, so fake, they're fizzy. Why do you want this amp here? But the reason why I have Angle, it's really mostly because they're a flagship amp, in my opinion. I myself own one, which is the Angle SC EL34. And I gotta be honest, it really is one of the more compressed and synthetic sounding Angles, but it does something that I've never heard in any other amp. And it's the way the bottom end projects. I can't explain it. You have to like physically play it and experience it yourself. It hits you in the shins in just a certain way that no other amp I've played does it. The Diesel Herbert doesn't do it. None of my Camerons do it. None of my Cameron Modern Marshalls, my Wizard, my 2C Plus. I spent hours trying to tweak some of my other 17 amps to match it, and they can't do it. And the Angle SC also has a really aggressive, complete growl to it. So yeah, it's a cool amp, worth checking out if you're into modern metal. And their other amps are cool too. I really like their Marty Friedman model. That's probably my second favorite amp. It's kind of like the Fireball on steroids. It has that really dark, throaty, low mid growl. It's probably the best lead amp Angle makes. Well, the SE's probably up there too, but yeah, it's a great one too. The Arts Edition is kind of cool if you want a more martially vibe from Angle. And I used to have a Invader 150. But now I'm rambling. Let's get into the top 5. So at number 5, we have Mesa Barba. Mesa Barba is a boutique Italian company, and it's the M0 Overdrive, which is right now their flagship amp. I used to own this amp, and most people describe this as like a cross between a Soldano SLO and a Marshall. The way I usually describe this amp to people is like a much more like aggressive, darker, much bigger, pissed off sounding SLO. I think it's a much better amp than the SLO personally. And yeah, it's very raw, very aggressive. It sounds just so big. The only reason why I got rid of this amp is because I got this other amp, a one-off amp where it's like a Cameron Atomica modded Marshall SLP which is just as big, if not more, than the Mesobarba, but has a more raw organic sound, just more aggressive, throaty, complete growl that's tighter. I mean, there's a bunch of reasons, but Mesobarba is a great amp. That's number 5. And number 4, we have Blutotone. And a lot of you guys will probably think Blutotone should be a lot higher on the list, but we're going to put it at number 4 for now. Blutotone is a factory direct company made in Colorado. They're kind of considered the premier ultimate if you're going for a Dumbly type sound. And to be honest, I'm not as experienced with Dumbly amps. I mean, I've played all the different Fuchses, all the super expensive Two-Rocks in the 7 to 10K range. And I do have to admit, the Blutotone I played, which was the High Plains Drifter 150 watt amp, destroyed those amps. It's so much better than what those amps are going for. I mean, to me, the Two-Rock and the Fuchs almost sound like you're hearing a recording what the Blutotone is. They're just nowhere near as raw or lively as it. And it might be the loudest amp I've ever played. I mean, yes, it was 150 watts, but even when it was like, I think 1.5 or 2, it was honestly, it could have been louder than a lot of 100 watt amps cranked. So it has a lot of good things about it. Maybe it's only number 4 because it's not as much my cup of tea. You'll just have to play one for yourself. But yeah, so number 3 on the list is going to be the Todd Sharp, specifically the JO8T45. I myself have this amp. These amps are another boutique amp made in Nashville, Tennessee. And what I really like about this amp is it's really a pretty distinctive voicing. It's not at all meant to be like a Marshall, a Vox, a Bogey, or Fender. It's its own flavor. To me, it has some similarities to the Dumble if I had to choose, but really it's its own thing. And it has a unique sound because it has these cleans that are really lush, detailed, and clear, but they're never pristine. There's always a little bit of hair and fur to the cleans of the Todd Sharp, and it's quite mid-rangey and woody. So it's a very cool amp. I have to admit, though, I'm not going to keep it because I got recently, as you saw in my first video, a 64 Vibra, and honestly, for me, it's just an every way superior amp. Like any sound I get out of the Todd Sharp, I'll A/B it with the Vibra, and I could get it to do a better version of that, and then its own thing. I mean, the Vibra rather is for me so far the best amp I've played for cleans. It's just such a gorgeous, beautiful tone. But now I'm rambling. It's not about the Vibra. Let's get back to it. At number 2 now, we have Wizard amps. And for a lot of people, Wizard might be the number 1 choice. Wizards are amazing amps. They're, again, very expensive. Wizard is made in Canada by Rick St. Pierre, who's known for being the amp tech of AC/DC. So, of course, they're the guys most associated with playing these amps. But there's lots of others, especially a lot of famous engineers, recording people. And yeah, they're one of the best amps out there if you're going for a Marshall-y sound. But to me, really, they're not exactly a Marshall-y sound. They kind of have, to me, more of like a high-watt Marshall hybrid. The main thing that impresses me about the Wizards is their unparalleled level of note definition. Every note, especially when you palm you, just sounds so dense, so rock solid everywhere. And it's just very impressive that it could do that. Also, people don't talk about it, but the cleans on it are really, really impressive. I don't like them as much as the Todd Sharp Vibra, maybe my Boogie C+, but after that, it might be the next one there. And you know, it's an EL34 amp, so you typically don't expect the nicest cleans, but it's really great, very bold, very punchy, high headroom, very pristine. And if I had to criticize this amp and be a little nitpicky, which is kind of what this channel is about, there are some shortcomings of this amp. It's still not, I mean, it's very raw and organic for a modern amp, but not quite as much, believe it or not, to me, as the Bogner Helios or Telios. Not as much as the amp that made this number 1 spot, which you'll find out shortly. But the other thing, which a lot of people complain about, I guess I didn't mention it yet, but it's the MTL model I have, and the one I'm putting on the map. You know, I really like the modern classics too, but I like the MTL better. I think it has a lot of what that amp has, but I think it's just heavier, just a little bit beefier sounding. It just is more my cup of tea. But it really doesn't have the mids or the upper mids like a Marshall. It doesn't have that growl, that throwy, vicious thing going on the hair. It's smoother and a little bit hollow sounding in those frequencies. And that's kind of why I think it reminds me of a high watt. Also because, you know, it's note definition, it gives it a high watty vibe. But so yeah, it's a very cool amp. It's been a keeper still for me. And the number 1 spot might surprise a lot of you guys. Some of you guys might know this, some of you might not, but it's another point-to-point boutique company made in Minnesota called Savage Amps. And to be honest, I wasn't impressed with them at first. I've owned actually some of their Voxy amps, like the Glass and the Schotten. I mean, those are okay. They would never be a top 10 or top 20. I would never get them over a real Vox, and I would also, if I were to go for a Vox, made today, I would probably choose Tex. But the amp that's putting them on the map at the #1 spot for me is the Blitz 50. What a surprisingly amazing amp for me. You know, I've owned pretty much and tried all these modern Marshall amps. I'm not even going to talk about it right now. I'll put in the description literally all the ones I've tried. Like, it's pretty exhaustive. The only ones I've kept were the Wizard and my Cameron Modern Marshalls. They've destroyed. They're just head and shoulders above everyone I've tried. Yet somehow this Savage Blitz is in that company. It's really in the same league to me. It's so raw and organic. The Blitz, so for those of you who don't know, the Blitz is kind of his take on the JTM 45. But with all his amps, they're never clones of amps. It's just kind of his take on it compared to a JTM 45 that has way more gain than those amps would ever have. It's darker sounding, but still very cutting. It's a lot hairier, throwier sounding, very aggressive. But it's kind of loose and sloppy, but in a great way. That's kind of part of the charm and what makes it do what it excels at the same time. We're for sure going to discuss and review this amp in future episodes. We're going to have Bart playing on this amp because it's very much, you know, blues, classic rock, and what it excels at. But the thing is, it can be great for metal too, especially if you boost it just, you know, you don't want to play metal if you're doing stuff that's very fast or requires a very tight percussive sound. But if you're playing slower stuff like Doom, I think it could be fantastic. Or if you're playing like classic stuff like Ozzy Osbourne, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, stuff like that, I think it really does an excellent job. And yeah, that does it for all of the top 5s today. We're going to have many more amazing top 5 content in the future. Stay tuned and hope you enjoyed it.